Hello, everybody. My name is Jason Noble. I am a Spanish teacher at Pella Christian High School in Pella, Iowa. Also, I'm the past president of the Iowa World Language Association a year ago, and it was during that time that the Iowa World Language Association was really involved with our state legislature about bringing the seal to the state of Iowa, and then once it was signed, being involved in the process of working with the Department of Ed to determine what should we use as tests and what should be the threshold and all of that. And so today's webinar is about administering the AAPPL and implementing the Seal of Biliteracy in your classroom. And today I'm joined by some of the folks at LTI, Language Testing International, which is the organization that actually runs the testing portion of the AAPPL for ACTFL, and that's Andrew Bowen and Joy Gifford, and so they will be on later in the webinar to talk about different aspects and to help out and make this go smoothly. But I wanted to just dig into it and get started. So if we could go to the next slide, first of all, just so we're all clear, what is the Seal of Biliteracy? You can see the map. It's gaining momentum. Iowa just turned dark blue just last spring. It was almost about a year ago to the day that our governor signed into law the bill that created the Seal of Biliteracy for Iowa. And then there's a lot of states that are considering it and in the early stages, but it's really gaining momentum from the very beginning, and it's granted to high school students that show proficiency in English and one other language. And so it's also important, I know that most of us are probably language teachers, but the Seal of Biliteracy is a great tool for ELL teachers to reward biliteracy and to really honor that home language of their ELL students. And so I think that the Seal of Biliteracy is a great tool for world language teachers as well as ELL learners. So let's go to the next slide. And one of the questions that came in was, is the Seal of Biliteracy a state or local initiative in your area? And as I said at the beginning, the Seal of Biliteracy in the state of Iowa is our government, our state government legislature. They passed a bill, the governor signed it, they passed that information on to the Department of Ed. The Department of Ed asked for the input of Iowa World Language Association as well as other organizations in the state, and came up with the qualifications for the Seal of Biliteracy. And then this spring is the first year that it can be granted. So Iowa teachers are in the process of testing in order to see about getting the Seal of Biliteracy for their students for the first time. Some states have a longer history. Some states, as you saw, don't have anything. And I know that there are other states where it's not a state or Department of Ed thing, but like in Nebraska, the Nebraska International Language Association, NILA, issues the seal through them, and so it is available in other forms. Some states that don't have the seal, I know that the local high schools issue it, so it's a Seal of Biliteracy issued by XYZ high school or school district. But as I said, in Iowa, we darkened into blue as a state that has officially adopted the seal just last spring. And so let's go on to the next. Which skills do you test with the AAPPL? The AAPPL is a test that can be used for qualifying for the Seal of Biliteracy because it tests reading, writing, listening, and speaking, the 4 domains of language, as well as ACTFL has identified the 3 modes of communication: presentational communication, interpretive communication, and interpersonal communication. And so as you can see on this slide, the AAPPL has broken it down into 4 sections. There's presentational writing, where the students are given a prompt and type away, answer that. The interpretive listening and reading are just that the message was received, and it's a lot of drag and drop. There's no language production needed for those. It's just measuring the interpretive ability. And then the interpersonal, which is listening and speaking. Interpersonal is that give and take of conversation. So there has to be a question, an answer, a follow-up, and the back and forth. And so that one is a video of a speaker speaking, asking some questions, giving the prompt, and then the student recording back as if they were having a web chat with the speaker. So all of these are required to be a test that is accepted for the Seal of Biliteracy. And they ask, another question that was asked is, what score does a student need to earn the Seal of Biliteracy? The great thing about the Seal of Biliteracy, it's such a grassroots thing that each state has kind of taken it and run with it. And each state has their own regulations regarding the seal. In Iowa, for example, a student can take multiple tests, not just the AAPPL, but for the AAPPL specifically, in order to receive the Seal of Biliteracy, they would need to get an I2 or above. And on the AAPPL, I2 is the lowest score that's considered intermediate mid. The AAPPL's broken down into the intermediate is I1, I2, I3, I4, and I5. And I2 through I4 is considered intermediate mid, as you can see on this graphic. I1 is considered intermediate low, and I5 is intermediate high. And so in our state, in Iowa, it's I2, but you would want to make sure you either check with your state world language organization or your Department of Ed to confirm what that is for your state. And let's go on to the next one. Did you consider using a different test for your students? I actually did. So a little bit of my history with the AAPPL test is last year was the first year giving it to my students. I knew I wanted to do it. I'd been talking to admin about how we could make this happen. How can we get the money to make it, which I'll talk about later. How can we have something? The math teacher has our Iowa test to see if he's doing what he should be doing. The language arts teacher has the Iowa test that our students are standardized Iowa tests, and the SAT and ACT on top of that. You know, if a bunch of students are failing in that, you know, something needs to change. Whereas I have my test that I make, that I grade, but I don't have those outside eyes. And so I really talked to my admin about wanting to have some sort of outside test that, you know, I'm not a part of, that can show my students and show me where are they really at proficiency wise. So as I looked at that, I did consider other tests. You know, there's the AP test, but I don't do an AP class. I only have students 9 through 12, level 1 through 4, and I felt like to do justice to AP, I needed to have them like do a 5th year, and there was no room for that in the schedule, and probably not enough students to do it. Also looked at the STAMP test, which is a very good test as well, and looked at the AAPPL, and it ultimately came down to the AAPPL for a couple of reasons. Number one, the association with ACTFL, the sort of seal of approval. This is ACTFL's test, and ACTFL's reputation precedes them greatly, and so that carried a lot of weight with me. And then the other thing is that we have a grade school, sister school, that has an immersion program, and they were already using the AAPPL to test their students. So I thought, you know, for continuity's sake, but I liked both of them. And one thing that I found later that I really liked about the AAPPL is that the AAPPL, it's easier to go back and just do one redo one section if there were some troubles. You can redo just one section. You don't have to redo a couple of sections, which is not the case, I believe, for the stamp. So that was something I found out later, but was very happy with when I found it out. So let's go to the next slide. What grade level students do you test? I teach Spanish 2, 3, and 4, and I test all levels, and all students take it. I do that not for the Seal of Biliteracy, although for the Spanish 4s, that's the main purpose. But I also do that in order to help myself. As I said, a big thing that I tried to do as I sold this to my admin was to say, you know, I want some sort of outside evaluation to see, like, how are my students really doing compared to other students, and how is their proficiency? And so for me, I use it as a teaching tool. One thing I like about the AAPPL test as well is when you finish, you're given a printout, and on that printout it says, you know, you scored I1 in interpretive reading, and then it will say specifically to interpretive reading, an I1 student can do blah, blah, blah. And then it gives them another thing is an I1 student, in order to level up, should be work on this, work on this, work on this. And it's very much showing them, it's not looking at their language from a deficiency skill of, oh, I'm not fluent, I can't do anything with the language. It's like, you can do this, and you can do this, and you can do this. And if you want to level up, work on this, work on this. And so it's a teaching tool as much as it is a, you know, standardized test that allows them to get a seal of biliteracy. And so I find it very valuable. I also like that you can do the AAPPL piece by piece. So I do know of some teachers who they can't do $20 per student for all their students, but they could do $5 for the reading or $10 for the reading and listening, and they just do that. And that data is helpful to them. So I do all of my students, but I realize that there's financial burden to do that. So, but it's been very valuable last year, and then now this year, taking it again the second time, I will be able to look, and I'll have that longitudinal data that shows growth. Hopefully, we'll see. I haven't finished testing, but so far so good. We are seeing growth with my Spanish 4s. Next slide. Does the school district pay, or do individual students pay for the test? This is the tricky question. So I'm at a private school. Pella Christian High School is a private school, and we have the students pay for it. It's similar to other classes at our school. For workbooks, students pay for it, and it's because we charge tuition, and we're a private school that we're allowed to do that. You may not be able to do that at your public high school, and so some of the things I hear, they say, you know, hey, this is a great opportunity. Whoever wants to, bring in the $20 and you can do this, and then whoever doesn't do it. And I think it's probably one of those things where, as you get more students getting the seal, and as it becomes more of the norm in your classroom, you'll probably get more. Another angle, I tried to approach it with my admin, and maybe this would help at the public school level too, is that I told them to think of this as a consumable. I don't use workbooks. I don't use online textbook subscriptions in my classroom. So since I don't do that, since you aren't having to pay for workbooks like my predecessor anymore, and that was easily around 16 to close to 20 bucks a student, since you don't have to pay that, could we just use that money and consider this a consumable that we use for this year, and so in that way get it covered? And so that is maybe an angle you might want to try too, especially if you are not using a textbook, not using a workbook, you can maybe push to say, that money we saved, could we use it for this? And another selling point I would say to your admin is just explain how this is outside test. This is a way they love data. They love data, especially if it's data that it's not my test that I created that I'm grading, because who's to know if my test is really a good indicator, because who am I? But this is the test that is sponsored by our national organization, AAPPL, and based upon their scale. And this is going to be good data for our school. Also, if you get parents who are like, oh, I don't really like what you're doing in class, and I don't think your class is very rigorous. I had some of that. And last year, after taking the apple and releasing that, I haven't heard a peep all year, because I was able to show the data shows, like, here's where they should be according to AAPPL, and here's where they're achieving. And I gave them, the class scores in aggregate, not individual students, although I gave the individual students and told them, check with your individual student to see what they got specifically. But that was very helpful. And so if that's been a problem in your district, and your admin's tired of hearing it, that's another way you can maybe sell this to them. So let's go on to the next one. What test do I need to give for the Seal of Biliteracy? So it's, again, depending on your state, you need to check. The AAPPL, as far as I know, is accepted in all of the 36 states. Obviously, because of its ties to AAPPL, this is not one you have to worry about. I would be very surprised if there was a state that does not accept the AAPPL as a legitimate test for the Seal of Biliteracy. But double check with your state just to make sure. And then within the framework of the AAPPL, there are two tests. There is the Form A and the Form B. And as we saw in that graphic a little bit earlier, the Form B test only goes up to I4. And so if you're in a state like Iowa, where I2 is the threshold, you're fine giving them Form A. If you're in a state, I know Illinois, our neighbors to the east, I believe I5 is the cutoff score. And so if you give them Form A, they're not going to get the seal. There's no way you can get I5 on that test, even if that student is a native heritage speaker and does amazing on the test. The highest that test will give them is I4, and so it tops out at I4, and so make sure to get Form B. But make sure you know what your state offers and what the cutoff is in your state. If it's below I4, then you're fine with Form A, or you can do Form B. I did Form B with my Spanish 4s, even though I could have just done Form A. And the good thing about Form B is it tops out at advanced low. And I wanted to see, are they hitting into that? I didn't really expect a lot of them, but I'm seeing a few of them in like interpretive reading or interpretive listening. They're getting A1s, and that was surprising to me. And I would have never have found that information out if I had given them Form B or Form A as I had done in the past. So you decide on that, but just make sure you know your state's cutoff. Next, when should I test students? Pretty much right now is the big rush. I'm also a rater with the Apple test, and I just got an email the other day from the person who's in charge saying, hey guys, hope you're having a great weekend. If you could do some grading or some rating over the weekend, our queue just keeps getting more and more full. So this is the big push. A lot of schools are doing it right now, and so this would be a great time. And I think that dovetails into the next question, which is how long will it take me to register all of my students? The first thing you need to do is set up an account with LTI, and that takes a couple of days, I think, for them to verify that you're, with such and such school district. And then after that's all set up, the registering them is pretty easy. This spreadsheet kind of shows you what you do. So you have a template, and you fill in the template. The template comes with those blue things on the top, and then you fill in the stuff on the bottom. But if you notice, a lot of the stuff you can just like write it one time and drag it down and basically copy it into, for example, the state. Well, that's going to be the same for every student. So it's not like you have to type CA times however many students, and the district and your name. And so, and then also speaking, writing, reading, and listening, those X's, though that's not anything too difficult. Once you get this done, you upload it onto the site, and it's been my experience this spring that it's ready to go immediately as soon as it's accepted, which is almost as soon as I hit submit. Then I go into my testing, and I can see their login, and I can see it's generated their login, username, and login, and I can get going. So that part of it doesn't take very long at all. You also want to give yourself some time as far as the grading goes. So 2 of the tests, the interpretive reading, the interpretive listening, those are computer graded. You get those back almost right away. It can take up to 2 or 3 hours, but it's almost right away. And then the interpersonal speaking and listening, that requires a rater, as well as the presentational writing. Computers aren't smart enough to be able to do that just yet, but it takes a trained rater to do that. And as I said, it's really getting the workload's really ramping up right now. This is the busiest time by far, and so it can take up to 2 weeks to get those back. So figure out when the latest you really want to have them, and at least give yourself maybe 3 weeks just to be safe. Walk it back, and then you'll be fine. It might not take that long. My Spanish 4s that are finished, it's been about 4 or 5 days, but again, it's really ramping up right now, and so I wouldn't be surprised at the busiest peak time. It might be 2 weeks. So give yourself some time, especially if you really want to be able to give this at a graduation or a pre-graduation awards ceremony. Make sure you give yourself plenty of time, at least 2 weeks, maybe 3, just to be safe. Not that it's going to come back, but then after you get the scores, it's time for you to do whatever you need to do. Next slide asks about how much will it cost. The Apple test is $20 for the full battery, and if you're doing it for the Apple, you'll need, or for the Seal of Biliteracy, you'll need to have the full battery. The Seal of Biliteracy isn't interested in a test that just measures their reading. Biliteracy is all of it. It's the reading, it's the writing, it's the speaking, it's the listening, and so you'll need all of them. The nice thing, as I said earlier, about the Apple test is you can break it up. So you can, if you just want to do the interpretive reading, it's $5. If you want to do the interpretive listening, it's $5. If you want to do the presentational writing, it's $5. No, I'm getting off. If you want to do the interpretive reading and listening together, those are $5. If you want to do the presentational writing, it's $5. Or if you want to do the interpersonal speaking and listening, that part is $10. And so you can kind of a la carte it. If you're just doing it for to see some sort of longitudinal data, that might be the way to do it if you can't get the full $20. But as far as test goes, $20 is very reasonable. The AP test, which most states accept as well, is going to be, a little bit north of $100, and so the Apple test at 20 comes in very reasonable, and so that's another thing I like about it. Next question. So what are tips for students if the speaking portion comes back as unreadable? Yeah, every now and then the audio for whatever gets garbled and the rater just can't rate it and it comes back as unreadable. But that actually happened to me last year, and what happened was for that student, we didn't get charged the $10 for their speaking and listening, and so I just reordered another only speaking and listening, which is again a nice thing about the Apple. You can just order that specific test that you need for $10, and she redid it, and then we had that score. It came back. It would be unfortunate if it were you planned to give the awards and you get an unreadable after 2 weeks, and then you're going to have to wait probably another 2 weeks to get the next score. But as far as what to do, just reorder just that section and redo it. And you didn't get charged the first time, so you'll get charged for the next time, and it'll all come out in the wash. And then we're coming to the end. So somebody asked, what are tips for students that are I-4 to move them that one level? Because some states are I-5, which is intermediate high. And I first want to say that if you look at AAPPL scale, this graphic that we're showing, time is a critical component for developing language performance. This is in the performance descriptors, AAPPLs. If you look at 9 through 12, you're just to the lower end of intermediate range. You're not even quite intermediate high yet, which is I2, 3, 4 on the AAPPL scale. So to ask a student in 4 years to get to I5 to intermediate high in just 4 years, that's asking a lot, and that's not necessarily to be expected. That's not to say that students can't do it, but according to AAPPL, I think you need to first have realistic expectations that that's not a normal place for 4 years. Now, if they've had 5 and they've done AP, yeah, that changes things. But even if you look at 6 through 12, they're not quite intermediate high. And so that really went into our discussion, I can say, for the state of Iowa, as we were adopting what should be the cutoff for the SEAL. Most of our schools are rural, and they have 9 through 12, Spanish 1 through 4. If we're going to set it at intermediate high, then according to this AAPPL graphic, most of our schools can't participate. Only the big schools, the big city schools that start them out in middle school, can do it. The small schools, the rural schools, which is a lot of our state, are not going to be able to get that. And maybe a student or two, but what's the point in having it if most of our students can't get it? That's not every state. And so I know in some states, they have a more robust FLES, foreign language in the elementary schools program, and a more robust middle school. Iowa doesn't. And that's why we picked intermediate mid, because intermediate mid is still stretching them. If you look 9 through 12, that's not even intermediate mid. But I will say this, the thing that's helped the best for my scores in the Apple is free voluntary reading. If you don't have a free voluntary reading, FVR, Google that tonight. It's a great tool for your students. Just like in English, who are the students who have the best English vocabulary? It's the ones that read. It's the ones that read books. And who are the ones that have the best Spanish vocabulary? It's the ones that read. If you can get some variety of reading materials, they have there's cheap ways to do that, and there are blogs out there that have written about how to do that. That has been a game changer in my classroom. And so I would say that really look into that. That will help your students' proficiency, which in so doing will help their Apple scores. So at this point, we come to the any other questions segment, and I believe there's a chat box that you'll be able to type your questions in, and I think Joy is going to help me so that I don't have to hunt through the
That's
chat
right.
box. Yes.
Hi, everybody. I'm Joy Gifford with Language Testing International. And Jason, thank you so much for taking the time, especially on a Sunday evening, to host this, and it's been wonderful. And Jason, if you can hear and jump in, try too. But what would you recommend teachers do to help prepare students for the Biliteracy Seal exam?
So another great thing about the Apple is, of course, that this is an actual developed assessment, and the content is, as we all know, refreshed every single year. Where does the content come from? It comes directly from those actual can-do statements. So first and foremost, just making sure that we as language educators are keeping up with those can-do statements that are released every single year. Taking a look at the world readiness standards, the proficiency guidelines, and performance descriptors that Jason was covering. That's kind of a good first step in the right direction. But in addition to those, there are Apple specific resources. So for instance, we have what are called the Apple Tips videos that Actful recorded. It was a couple years ago now. These videos, I cannot recommend them highly enough. They are videos of kids, school age students who are speaking to our students and letting them know exactly, first and foremost, pretty much saying to the students, okay, this is going to be an assessment like you've never seen before. There will be a simulated live chat. There will be, writing prompts that allow you to respond to emails and, put you into these real world settings. And going on and on about what those students can do to A, best prepare themselves, and B, exactly what they can do as they're completing the assessment. So for instance, an example of, one of the videos, the kids mentions, take a look at how the question was posed to you. Take a look at, was it posed to you in the present tense, in the past tense? What words were used? And kind of form your answer based on the way in which the question was framed. So that's a great resource for the students. We also have another huge advantage to the Apple is Apple releases what are called the tasks and topics every single year. And these are available public domain right there on the Apple website. And what these are, essentially, it's kind of self-explanatory, lists of all the tasks and topics that are covered on the assessment. So we as educators can make sure that, well, if we already have an ACTFL centric curriculum, then all of these tasks and topics will already be covered, as we are teaching our languages. But if not, we as educators can take a look at these lists, make sure, okay, have we touched on something like clothing? Have we talked about, being able to respond to emails and, so on and so forth. So we can take a close look at those. It's not recommended to share those with students, but as far as our heritage learners go, what we can really do is show them those, show them those videos and really tell them to focus on the quality of the content that they're producing as opposed to the quantity, especially looking at the presentational writing section.
And I
Perfect.
know, can I jump in now? Can you guys hear me?
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
Okay.
Clear as day now.
So what I use for my students too is like I don't want the test mechanics to get in the way of their showing their proficiency, and so I like how Apple has like demo tests, and so I do that as like a whole class thing. I take about 15 minutes and we look at, okay, so here's the demo for the interpretive reading, interpretive listening, and you're going to drag and drop, and like we kind of do the demo, just a few of the questions together, so that when they get to their own device and they're doing it, it's not a thing of like, oh, I got mixed up on the computer logistics of it. Or especially the speaking and listening, that really throws students off because it's a video, but it tries to pretend to be a web chat. And so I know that students are like, she just like looked at me and like nodded her head like she heard me talking. And I show them the video on the demo of that, and I'm like, look, it's looks like you're chatting with somebody and they're nodding their head like they're listening to you. And if that messes you up, look away and do your speaking. So just the mechanics to get them familiar with it. There's a demo on LTI's website for for all of the tests, and for Form A as well as Form B. You also want to be mindful they just came out with the 2.0, so if you ordered it after a certain date, Andrew could probably say it's going to be the 2.0 as opposed to the original one. So and there's not a whole lot of difference, but it's refreshed a little bit of the way things look.
Yeah, that exact date would be March 1st. So yeah, as Jason mentioned, any Apple ordered on or after March 1st is automatically registered for the Apple 2.0, which is a new delivery platform that allows us to administer the test on any device, whether it's a desktop, laptop, including Chromebooks, as well as tablets. There's also a full suite of accessibility features. We're now 100% WCAG compliant.
Okay, we have another question. Do you know if the state level is an intermediate low and the student gets higher than that, will the seal show their higher level?
I know that some states like Illinois, it's tiered. They have like a gold, silver, gold, platinum, or something to that effect that shows, the higher achievement. And I really like that idea. Our state just has one at this point, but there's interest in our World Language Association to look into that. But it goes state to state. And as far as intermediate low, I don't know that there's a lot of states. I know North Carolina, I'm pretty sure North Carolina has set it at intermediate low. There may be one or two others, but most of them it's going to be intermediate high or intermediate mid or above.
Great. Okay, the next question. On the speaking and writing section of the Apple, are the students timed? If not, do you encourage them to write and speak as much as they can?
There's no timing on the writing section, and so I encourage them to answer fully. And I give them the short idea of like, they cannot. The rater cannot rate what is not on there. They can't take stuff like, I was thinking this, but I didn't write it. Then it's like as if you don't have that proficiency. So you need to put it out on the paper. And obviously you could answer a question with a short one sentence, but that shows novice like language. And so you need to string together sentences. You need to make your sentences more complex, and if you want that. So I encourage them. One thing I noticed doing Form A is the interpretive or the presentational writing took a lot longer, and my students were kind of crabbing about that because they get some advanced level prompts. They want to see if they meet advanced level, and in order to do that, that's paragraph like discourse. And so it's going to take a little longer if you do Form B with the advanced level prompts. As far as the speaking and listening, the way that it works is you have the person, the person on the fake web chat talk, and then there's a little countdown timer on the 2.0, which I really like, that says if you want to rehear it, you can click this, and it's like 5, 4, 3. And if they don't click it in time, then it just starts recording them. Or if they start talking, it just starts recording them. But if they hit it, they get to hear it one more time, and then it goes right into recording, because it's designed to be the give and take of a conversation. That's what interpersonal is. And so you can't just be like, you're in a conversation and like, oh, hold on, let me just think about this for a little while, and wait a minute or two before responding. That's not how interpersonal works. Presentational, there is some, like, they do have time to think. And so there is like a limit to how much time I can proctor you. So there's that limit. But as far as writing goes, there's no time limit. For speaking, there's you just have to start up after the first time, or if you ask for them to repeat right after they say it the second time. And it depends on the prompt. If it's a prompt that's looking for novice level language, it might only be 30 seconds that it gives you to record. If it's a prompt that's looking for advanced level language, it might give you 2.5 minutes to record or more, because you're going to have to, give more to give an advanced level response.
Great. What's the time lag between applying to be a rater and getting your yes or no answer from LTI or AAPPL?
I can speak from my perspective, and maybe Andrew can speak to this, but like I said, I think it was in the fall when we got back to school. I applied, I didn't hear much, and then I got some interest, and then they wanted me to do the OPI to make sure I was advanced mid or above, and I did that, and then I passed that, and then they, I think around the springtime, they do the class, the training thing, and that took me about a month-ish, and then I started rating in April of last year. Andrew, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, so now what is done is actual recruits year-round for Apple raters. And what was done this year is all of that training, the workshops and everything that Jason mentioned, were done in November, December. And those individuals, we actually ended up bringing on 300 this year. And those individuals were up and ready to go by March to start rating apples. And I actually just posted in I'm not sure if everyone can see it or if just Joy can, but I posted the link to the section of the AAPPL site where you can see, the full description of becoming an Apple rater process.
And I can also share that with everyone after, because we're going to share the presentation, so I can always add that to it.
Awesome.
So we have a question about proctoring. I am scheduled, and the tests have been ordered, to proctor the AAPPL next week. When I get the exam codes, will there be a step-by-step instruction for me to give my students the best testing experience?
Not with that. They have that information on the website as sort of like what to do as a proctor. And I think it does talk about, having the environment, what it should be like, but that won't come in all that information that gets sent to you. You'll want to go to the website and look at that information.
Okay. I am a French teacher, and there's quite a bit of data showing that the stamp test and the AP test are not equitable among languages. The level of language and the question types tend to be biased against French, and as a result, the students tend to score lower on French tests as compared to Spanish. I am confident the AAPPL test will be more equitable, but is this an issue that has been addressed at AAPPL? Andrew,
That's probably you. That's above my pay grade.
Yeah, I'm happy to take that one. So yes, the AAPPL is currently available in 13 different languages, and as I mentioned, the content of this assessment is refreshed every single year to align perfectly with those AAPPL proficiency guidelines and the AAPPL can-do statements. As we all know, those do differ. There are can-do statements and proficiency guidelines that do differ slightly depending on the language. So the short answer form of that is yes, absolutely. All languages are given equal treatment, and all nuances of those languages are taken into consideration as we create and redevelop the content.
Next question. What do we do if we do not have anyone at our school who really knows about how we become an AAPPL testing school? How do we get started?
I can speak to that. From my school, it was just me as a teacher doing that. It's just kind of educating yourself about the different tests and seeing which one fits for what you are wanting, and then going and meeting with your admin about it, and a big push can be that outside data that they like to have. That who's to say my kids are learning anything because I'm the one who designs the tests and I'm the one who grades them. So, you know, it's good to have some outside eyes that either can confirm that or point out that, you know what, maybe you got a faulty Spanish teacher here.
Next question. Who do we ask to find out about the levels for our state? And this person's from North Carolina and says North Carolina ... intermediate low.
Yeah, yeah, I'm 90 some percent sure it's intermediate low in North Carolina. I actually I got my master's from Appalachia State, but so I have some friends at North Carolina. But I go to FLANC, the Foreign Language Association of North Carolina. Go to their website. I'm sure their website has something about it.
Perfect. Next question. Is it possible for homeschoolers or online students to take the AAPPL?
I think that would it's possible for them to take the AAPPL, definitely. If the follow-up is then can they get the Seal of Biliteracy? I would assume so. But that would be like maybe a Department of Ed if it's administered by the Department of Ed thing. As of now in Iowa, I don't even know that they've kind of thought that through since we're just in our first year of doing that. I assume if you're in a state that's headed a little bit longer, that's come up already, but I'm not even sure that that's been on the radar, but I can't imagine that the Department of Ed wouldn't, you know, have a way of doing that. The thing is, the seal goes onto a high school diploma, so I don't know how that would work if they were homeschooled, but just awarding it, yeah, that would be a Department of Ed question.
Okay, next question. Is AAPPL replacing the AP exam? Do colleges recognize the AAPPL?
I don't think that it's replacing the AP exam personally. The AP exam is, you know, it goes with the AP course, and it's really kind of geared towards their 6 different topics, and it does examine reading, writing, speaking, and listening. But I think that's gonna continue to remain. It's just that AAPPL is another option out there if you're looking to get the Seal of Biliteracy. Something to keep in mind too, most states do allow the AP exam to be used, and that might be a good option if you are teaching AP and you have the students are going to take the AP test anyway, but the AP test doesn't get graded till June, and you don't usually get the results until like the middle of the summer. And so if you're wanting this to be recognized before graduation or at graduation, the AP test is not going to have the scores come back in time to do that. So they can still get the seal. I mean, that is okay, and if that's all that you're wanting for it, then that might be the way to go. But just keep in mind that you're not going to get the results until middle of summer.
Next, for Minnesota, the law says intermediate low for a certificate. What is the equivalent? Is it an I2 or an I3?
Intermediate low on the AAPPL is an I1. So there's only one score for intermediate low, which is I1, and there's only one score for intermediate high, which is I5. Everything else, I2, 3, and 4, is intermediate mid.
Okay. When you say intermediate mid, does that mean that students must score at least intermediate mid in all 4 areas, or is there an average score?
That is correct, the first one. So they would need to get I2 or above on all 4 tests. And so in Iowa anyway, and I'm assuming that's how it is in others. What I don't know is if your state would allow, you know, let's say they got it all but the interpretive reading. The nice thing about AAPPL is you could pay $5 and retake that and maybe do better. I don't know if your state would allow that. I believe as of now Iowa would, but that would be something to check into if you had a student who, they just didn't do so well. They were, having some drama or just having an off day, and they bombed this one section that you decided to do that day. The Apple makes it very easy to redo just that section, and you can pay for that a la carte.
Okay, so that's all of our questions. So thank you, everybody, for submitting those. That was wonderful. We are going to wrap this up, but before we do, I just wanted to let everyone know that LTI, we want everyone to share their Seal of Biliteracy success stories with us, either as an educator or with your students. And we're going to be giving away 5 iPads and 5 $750 educator grants this spring. So we would love for you to submit your stories to us. We have a great new website. It's called applecentral.com. And on there, you can find all things Apple. It's a great Apple resource tool. It could probably answer some of the questions that we talked about today. And by Wednesday, there will be a place that you could go and submit your story. So we're looking for either students to submit a picture or a selfie with their Apple score report, or if they want to submit a video and tell their story and what they're going to use the Seal of Biliteracy for. I'm going to use it so that I can study abroad, or I'm going to use it so I can be an interpreter, things like that, and what they love about their languages. And then we're going to have a grand prize of $1,500 grant. So the deadline for submission will be May 1st. And like I said, if you could visit www.applecentral.com, it should be up by Wednesday. And it should be fun. And then we can share the stories with everybody, and people will have fun seeing the students with their certificates and also the teachers talking about their students. So we're going to wrap it up. But thank you so much for attending today. Jason, you were wonderful. Andrew, thank you. And if anyone has any further questions about Apple, you can email us at sales@languagetesting.com or support@languagetesting.com. Or, of course, you can get in touch with Andrew Bowen, which is Bowen, Bowen, @languagetesting.com. So thank you so much. I hope everyone has a great week and a lovely evening. Have a good night. Bye-bye.
Goodbye.
Bye.